Charles Drace on behalf of 350.org.
Thank you. Can you please start the video and turn the sound up as high as it'll go? Only the scientists know how desperate global warming has become, and they are not being reported or listened to. World temperatures above pre-industrial levels have doubled in the last 8 years. As a result, Greenland glaciers and the Arctic ice sheet are melting so fast that the cold water is slowing the Atlantic current. Moderate temperatures in Europe, North America, Africa, and even New Zealand depend on the Atlantic current. Greenland melting has locked in already 1 foot of sea level rise by 2050. Arctic winter temperatures reach 36 degrees Fahrenheit above historical levels. Scientists are alarmed by how rapidly Antarctic ice is melting now as the warming ocean melts the ice sheets from underneath. Antarctic melting is now locked in sea level rise of 10 feet by 2100. Atmospheric CO2 just last Tuesday reached 412 parts per million, the highest level in 70 million years. 350 parts per million is the maximum sea level. Temperatures in the Middle East last summer reached 46 degrees and even 54 degrees in Qatar. They burn oil and gas for the electricity to run their air conditioners.
The hot weather is helping supercharge the wildfires.
What has really surprised scientists is how rapidly the feedback mechanisms have kicked in. The rising temperatures result in more and bigger forest fires. Forest fires decrease carbon sequestration as well as increase CO2 levels and airborne soot particulate. Increased soot blackens glaciers, which make them absorb heat from the sun faster and then thus melt faster. Melting glaciers create sea level rise and sea volume, which increases the frequency and force of hurricanes. Melting Antarctic seaborne ice sheets allow land glaciers to flow into the ocean and thus to melt. Melting Arctic ice helps create warmer Arctic waters, which thaw frozen tundra. Melting tundra releases CO2, much of which turns into methane because of microbe activity. Our biggest carbon sink, the ocean, has just about reached maximum carbon absorption levels. Drought kills vegetation, which not only sequester carbon, but also help the soil retain rainwater, thus droughts resulting in more damaging floods. The disasters we've seen this past 2 years at 1 degree above pre-industrial levels, plus the rapidly increasing feedback loops, mean the Paris 2-degree target is a treacherous nonsense, and so our targets way out in 2050. The scientific debate now is whether we've already passed the point of no return because of the feedback loops and the increasing carbon output around the world, or whether we still have 2 to 3 years before we reach the point of no return. 40 countries around the world rely on oil and gas extraction to keep their economies going. If they were to stop, there would be mass revolts caused by the resulting economic depressions. So we cannot count on very much voluntary reductions in extractions of fossil fuels. Therefore, the reductions must come from consumers. 350.org and other organizations have been relatively successful in getting banks and superannuation funds to divest from fossil fuel lending and investment. Many local governments have done the same. Auckland was recently in the news about that. A big challenge is getting consumers, whether they be local and national governments, companies, or individuals and families, to reduce activities and consumption that use fossil fuels. Governments need to take the lead with regulations and by setting examples for citizens to follow. But governments are slow to act. So cities around the world have realized this and are now leading the way towards carbon reduction. and we applaud Christchurch City Council for your leadership in reducing the council's greenhouse gas emissions.
You're looking at the largest off-stream reservoir in the United States, and it should be twice as full at this date and time. Normally, you can see the water line where it's eroded on the hills and along the dam, and usually we fill up every year except when there's a drought, and this is the third year of a major drought.
But we submit that the City Council is not doing enough, and it's not doing it fast enough. The situation is dire. At this rate, our grandchildren will not inherit a livable world. It's that serious. So on behalf of all current and future populations around the world, 350.org Christchurch submits. We submit that the current key proposals form only one part of the long-term plan. The other part must be measurable goals and mechanisms to measure and evaluate progress towards those goals. We submit that the top priority goals must be preparing for a hotter future, and a much more dramatic program of reducing greenhouse gas emissions is necessary. Council needs to fast-track its climate resilience approach. Council needs to develop a strategy about which areas of our city to defend from the effects of climate change and where to retreat from. This will help inform decisions on future infrastructure investment and land use. Council infrastructure strategy needs to include specific climate mitigation and adaptation projects. We commend the Council on their target to become carbon neutral by 2030 and request that you measure and report on the carbon footprint of all new investments and all new activities. We submit the Council should not only follow the government's look-through of all policies through a climate lens, but lead the government by also assessing all actions to determine whether they mitigate or contribute to global warming. Now, this is the Port Hills fire. A wind change would have devastated most of Kashmir, maybe more. Questions, anyone?
Right, thank you. Very powerful presentation. Glenn.
Thank you, Charles. Very telling, obviously, but just in terms of what we can do locally, you know, I've got a personal view over the residential red zone as an opportunity over a carbon sink, however small in proportion to the whole question and problem. Have you got a view on that?
Well, any carbon sink. One thing I would mention is that in a hotter temperature, a lot of the plants and trees that we have in Christchurch won't survive a hotter temperature. So when you're developing carbon sinks, work with natives and do the research to make sure the natives can work with higher heat levels.
Yeah, Phil, sorry.
Thank you, Charles. One of the issues I see in terms of the conversation, say, that we need to have with our residents is that people perhaps who are going to be most directly affected are kind of like will hold on to their belief that, in fact, the impacts that you referred to, like storm surge and sea level rise, that in fact they're not going to affect them. So I guess my question is, or will affect them less, or much further out. My question is, what would you suggest, or what ways would you suggest we have conversations with people to really engage with them so that in fact there's a better understanding of the issues that you've raised?
Well, it certainly is difficult. So many people just don't recognize the problem at all. My suggestion would be to start projects in those areas that are designed for resilience or mitigation, and use those projects as a stepping stone to advertise within the community that it's so bad you're having to do something, or having to do it right now. And that way the community will recognize that, and then you can bring the community in to help.
Vicky?
Have you read the Productivity Commission report that's just come out?
I'm sorry, Vicky, I can't hear you.
Have you read the recommendations of the Productivity Commission report on climate change that's just come out?
No, I've just seen a review of it.
Right. Okay.
But the review I saw seemed to me to suggest that we can have a transmission period over a long period of time.
No, it's actually very good, and plots the path towards achieving net carbon neutrality by 2050. But beyond the recommendations that are here, which makes sense, is there anything specific that you want the council to do? I mean, the path towards the carbon neutrality for the city council and the city will come to us in a couple of months, and will be quite visible. But is there anything you want to add to what's being done?
No, because you've got such a good organization now in the climate area, in the sustainable area. You guys know much better than I do what you can do and how you can do it and what your target should be. We just want it to go faster because 2050 is far too late. Any goal for 2050. Kennedy Graham told me that the reason that the Vivid Globe report set 2050 as the goal to become carbon neutral was because that was the only way they could get national on board. And they really needed to set it at 2030. And that's why I was so pleased that you've set it at 2030, because that's realistic. 2050 is not.
For the organisation, 2050 for the city is the plan. Yeah.
Well, maybe you should rethink that.
Well, we can only influence the city. We can't direct. I mean, we can. The organisation, they've got a strict target, but the city, we have to work with a number of different players in order to achieve that. It's not something we can impose. It's not like a major city in the United States.
No, but you can lead.
Yes, and no, that's what I'm saying.
That.
We can
Yeah.
influence, so that's why we've chosen the...
And the one area that you didn't mention that we are working on is the procurement, because we spend $1 billion a year, and it enables us to ensure that others also have a sustainability strategy. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Great.
Look, thank you very much, Charles, as usual. Very powerful presentation. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.